A 20-year Air Force and combat veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Marcell Strbich, gives his thoughts on Israel, Iran, and the U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear facility next on The Tom Roten Show.
Free speech is non-negotiable. Tyranny cannot coexist with freedom. Lies must be exposed. The truth will not be canceled. This is The Tom Roten Show.
Hi, everyone. I am the straight shooter, Tom Roten. Thank you for finding the show on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spreaker. Wherever you find podcasts, search for Tom Roten Show. Also available at TomRotenShow.com. All past episodes there as well. TomRotenShow.com. Well, very pleased to have joining me on today's episode retired Lieutenant Colonel Marcell Strbich. He is a Republican candidate for Ohio Secretary of State in next year's primary, but also a former Air Force intelligence officer and 20-year veteran of our military. We'll talk to him about a variety of issues, including his campaign, but also his thoughts on President Trump ordering the bombing of Iran's nuclear facility and this war between Israel and Iran and America's involvement. That's all coming right up. Also, want to hear from you on this issue, Roten Army. Email address, tomrotenshow@outlook.com. That's tomrotenshow@outlook.com. The Tom Roten Show is brought to you in part by Panhandle Support Services. If you're looking for in-home care needs, reach out to Evan Worrell at Panhandle Support Services, where they provide caring comfort at home. 7 locations across West Virginia, ready to meet your needs with dedicated and trustworthy caregivers. Look them up at personalinhomeservices.com. That's personalinhomeservices.com. I'm going to get a unique perspective here from a combat veteran, a man who spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force, intelligence officer, retired lieutenant colonel, and he happens to be a Republican candidate for Ohio Secretary of State. Marcell Strbich, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be with you in the audience.
Yeah, so let's first talk about what's happening here in the Middle East between Israel and Iran, U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. When this happened, what was your first impression of that? Because a lot of MAGA, a lot of Trump supporters said, man, we voted for this guy because we didn't want to be in one of these endless wars. We voted for this guy because he said he was the candidate of peace. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is I didn't take that initial impression because I understand that the president, even if you look at his first term and his actions, which we have a track record to look at, was always limited in his interventions, and he had created for himself a limited set of objectives. So go back to 2017-18, the Qasem Soleimani, right? So I was deployed to Iraq, like many service members through the 2000s, and we were personally impacted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' involvement in that proxy war. And, you know, there were over 1,000 Americans lost, maimed through the actions of Iran. And President Trump's actions back then indicated that he was not going to take the same approach as President Bush or President Obama in certain instances. He wanted a limited set of objectives for Iran. And so my first impression was, where does Israel want to go with this, right? And you got to look at this war, or this, they call it the 12-day war now because it kind of was a big spurt of bombings. Israel kind of started down that path, and it looks like we capped it off with a targeted strike against 3 nuclear facilities that we've known about, and there's been a lot of war plans probably surrounding for many, many years. And so it really comes down to who are the 2 men that are in question that are working this. And it's Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been a prime minister on and off since 1996, and he's reaching the tail end of his life. And you have kind of President Trump, who's 79 years old. So both men have legacies. But President Trump's legacy is he wants to be a peacemaker, and Prime Minister Netanyahu's legacy is he wants to end the existential threat from Iran to his country forever. And so the 2 of them are going to go up until a certain point, And then I think President Trump, being a very pragmatic leader, is going to stop at a certain point and try to draw Iran back to the. So I always knew this was not a war for regime change from the American perspective, in this administration's perspective. It's a war to bring Iran to the negotiating table. And if there's one area of the world my experience tells me you can do that, leaning with the military option, it's the Middle East. Because the Arab, the Persian culture, just that culture in general, understands force, understands strength, and they actually look to America to play a central intervening role, and they have ever since the Arab Republic, United Arab Republic, and all those attempted Arab unity movements from the 1960s fell apart. And so we have business interests intertwined with a lot of countries, and no one wants to see Iran in that part of the world get a nuclear weapon. So I'm not surprised that other countries like Qatar are doing shuttle diplomacy, backdoor diplomacy. I'm coming to expect this as part of the negotiation process.
Interesting. So first off, as far as the nuclear facilities, have we either hampered or totally eliminated Iran's capabilities to have a nuclear bomb anytime soon?
Yeah, I think that's the $64,000 question. And you hear a lot of press conferences and a lot of media narrative and scrutiny going on right now to the extent of trying to make this argument. But I think the argument's a pedantic one. Because, look, we hit those facilities. There's some degree of damage. So there's the what degree has been destroyed, and then there's the whole aspect of if you think you're going to build a nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment program in excess of what the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association agreement is, we're not going to let you do that. So there's a couple of strategic motives here for the United States taking this step right now, right? Yes, there's the protection of Israel, the guarding of their interests and ours that intertwine in different ways, economically, technologically, militarily. We can't discount that. But what this sends a message, whether it's 80%, 100%, I can't say, nor do I think we can know definitively unless we go down underground 260 meters and we assess that. What I think it's going to be is this is going to be, from an intel perspective, this will be a rolling assessment. They'll come up with an initial assessment of how much damage was done to each facility. They probably have already given that to the Secretary of Defense. That's probably the basis of President Trump making his proclamations that we, obliterated it or so forth and so on. And then I think with time, we're just going to have to see how Iran is going to react and what they're going to do over time. Because it wasn't just their nuclear program. There's their ballistic missile program, right, which they can use to put a nuclear weapon on top of. So there's been degradation. We know that the Iranian systems that deploy long-range missiles have been degraded. The question now begins is, does Iran change their behavior, right? And does the United States stop short of moving in that direction where we push further? Because I think the mistakes we made in the past with Iraq and Afghanistan and the message we were trying to send to Libya was we wanted to use an aerial bombing campaign and then a ground invasion to exercise regime change. Well, in my lifetime, Tom, I've never seen regime change work like that. Mm-hmm. So we can't continue to do the same thing over again and expect a different result. We're going to have to work this a little differently, but in the end, the Iranian people are going to be the impetus to do that. If they're going to rise up, that's going to come down more from the internal dynamics. But I do think this weakens Iran's internal regime because they've lost key leaders, and they now don't look that strong in terms of their reaction. So that's going to embolden their hardliners, and there's going to be a lot of turmoil internally in the country.
Now, Trump did put out on Truth Social something about regime change, and then he put out that phrase, make Iran great again. I mean, that would be wonderful. I've seen those pictures of women walking around Iran back in the 60s, early 70s without head coverings. And, Iran cities looked a lot like American cities back then. I mean, that'd be wonderful. But that's something I believe that their people should have to do. It shouldn't be up to the taxpaying citizens of America. Look, we haven't made America great again. I mean, we're making some strides here in these first 6 months with the border issues and deporting some of these criminal alien wife-beating thugs. But listen, we still have a lot of other problems that have not been taken care of as of yet. So before we make Iran great, I'd like to make America great again. How about you?
I'm with you. And I think that we're just getting started. It's been only 6 months. There's going to be some big passage of legislation. I was talking to people recently, the big, beautiful bill. They've been talking about that. That'll be some good. And there's some areas I don't think that this current Republican Congress has worked out yet with spending. I think they still haven't pulled that back. They're going to have to find DOJ gave them a clean slate to work with. The question is going to be, how do you turn that machine in Washington in the direction or the agenda? And I'm questioning, really, is the MAGA agenda about reducing spending? I don't know the answer to that. I'm asking that in an honest way. Sure, we're going to stop, certain overseas, what do we call it, NGOs that were influencing, interfering, and propagandizing against America, in America. But that's really a small portion of it. And what I'm excited about is, where is the president going to go, and where is the states going to go with election reforms? Because we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In the last 20 years, we've really drifted in terms of accountability and public oversight over our election systems. And we've got processes that are broken, that need to be addressed, because we're getting people onto voter rolls everywhere who are not eligible, who should have never been put on a voter roll. Yeah. And now we've got a very loose system that allows them to vote by mail-in ballot. In Ohio, we've got 1 million voters casting ballots without a copy of a photo ID. We've got third-party voter groups that are going around paying canvassers to collect and register people, but they're not necessarily presenting valid credentials. And so the process is just too weak. It's built around this idea that voters, we place convenience and ballot accessibility above the security and the actual integrity of valid, who's a valid voter. And that's what I'm working on in 2026 as a Secretary of State candidate, to be the first in the country to put the emphasis on that area, to take what I learned in the military, where we updated some of our antiquated, lagging weapon systems, and we need to start sharing information better so that we can actually verify identity, residency, citizenship. These are areas we shouldn't have allowed to degrade for 20 years, but we have, and we've got to pay for it now, because trust and confidence in the election systems is pretty low.
Yeah. I want to ask you, while we're on this subject, about congressional districts. A few years ago, West Virginia went from 3 to 2. Ohio lost 1 in the last census. So we found out that in the census, they are counting undocumented people, illegal aliens living here in America. So that has boosted California's, population to where, they're maintaining congressional districts based upon non-U.S. citizens. I mean, that would flip Congress on its head if we went by only U.S. citizens. How do we ever get to that point? That needs to happen.
Well, certainly they do a census every 10 years, and we're still 5 or 6 years out. I remember that ruling that you talked about. The Supreme Court is very controversial. A lot of the nominees, justices that were appointed by President Trump, I think swung that decision. And what that does is it diluted our representation, right? Because the argument was, well, they're receiving federal services, so we should count them. These are residents within our country. But man, oh man, you're basically saying that they can have more representation in Congress because these states now have those people. And so that is diluting the vote of a U.S. citizen, there's no doubt. I know there's conversations about what the Trump administration can do legalistically to maneuver about that, and whether they can draw that, a ruling back out, or to try to create a census, process earlier to revisit that. I don't know who's heading it up per se, or if the chance of it is going to be strong before 2030. But I agree with you, Tom. I think that gave 10 or 15 more seats to states that have, allowed for large populations of non-citizens to come in and feed, clothe, and allow them access to social services. It's a total drain. If we were to look at it across the states, it goes into billions of dollars. And it really doesn't matter if you're a Republican state right now or a Democrat, you're paying for it, we're paying for it. And to me, it's existential crisis for our country when we allow this to continue. And so I don't think we're going to be able to deport people fast enough considering the numbers that we took in. We're going to have to do this in a multi-pronged strategy. Some of it's going to be illegal. Some of it's going to be deportation operations. Some of it's going to be turning off the money, congressionally speaking, to the states for some of these programs. And in my instance, as a desired Secretary of State candidate, some of it is going to be me ensuring that they cannot register, that they cannot vote themselves these benefits, and to ensure that the 300,000 or so that have driver's licenses and state IDs in Ohio cannot circumvent what I would tell you is a weak verification process on the front end when people register to vote. And fortunately, I have enough authority in Ohio's law to be able to do that when the people of Ohio elect me in 2026. And I'm going to be putting my priority on that right up front because I've already gone there, did the legislation for it. I just need to be able to implement and direct the County Board of Elections to change their procedures and their review standards.
Very interesting. We're talking with Marcell Strbich. He is a Republican candidate for Ohio Secretary of State and a 20-year military veteran, retired at the rank of lieutenant colonel, served in the Air Force as an intelligence officer. So we're getting some great perspective on what's happening on the world stage here. The Tom Roten Show is driven by Martin Transport, now hiring Class A CDL truck drivers for their Canova, West Virginia terminal. If you're looking for better pay and better benefits, I want you to apply online at martintransport.com. That's martintransport.com. All right, Marcell. So you mentioned DOGE. Well, President Trump and Elon Musk have had a little parting of the waters here, a little falling away. I'm wondering if that's going to happen with the Director of National Intelligence, former Democrat Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, because she testified before Congress back in March saying that she didn't believe that Iran was getting ready to make a nuclear bomb. So I don't know what happened from March to June. Now, conceivably, things could have changed. The intel coming in could have been different and better because you're more relying on the newer people rather than maybe she back in March was still relying on Biden administration intel. I don't know, but it also seems like Trump has thrown her under the bus. So I want to get your thoughts on that situation. First off, how close was Iran actually to a nuclear bomb? Because you mentioned Netanyahu earlier. This guy's been warning of this since 1992. I mean, I was at Marshall University then, calling Marshall University's national championship game win over Youngstown State, by the way. Jim Tressel was the coach of Youngstown State then.
That's right.
Yes, and Marshall won the 1AA national championship. I called that on the radio. Yeah, I'll sign autographs later. Nobody cares. But that's where I was in 1992 when Netanyahu was first sounding the alarm saying that Iran is going to have a nuclear bomb in 2 to 3 years. Well, obviously, that didn't happen.
Yeah, if you were in his shoes, you'd be making those assertions. But I'll tell you the difference here, and I'll tie it back to Tulsi Gabbard. So when you're getting an intelligence assessment, you need two things. You need capability and you need intent. You need both of those. And the hardest thing to know is intent. And so for the last 20, 30 years, we've all been going back and forth about doesn't Iran intend to or not intend to weaponize their uranium enrichment program. I think and assess that when Tulsi Gabbard was given her assessments as the Director of National Intelligence and she spoke in a public manner in front of Congress, so forth, in March, I think she was speaking heavily and influenced heavily by the assessments that involved capability. Because for some time now, Iran has had the necessary capability and then some for uranium enrichment. And this is a uranium enrichment level that exceeds far anything they need for a civilian nuclear program. So it's important to distinguish that. You can have a civilian nuclear program with a certain amount of uranium enrichment, and then you have just a ton more uranium enrichment that you don't need. The part here that I think the media is trying to spin and pick off Trump advisors like they always have done from General Flynn and others is they've tried to pontificate about this intrigue that really isn't there with the intent. Now, Israel says the intent is there, but do you take face value intelligence coming from a foreign intel service. In my business, when we were going through that process and we would have, let's say, a foreign intel service, we would have to have what we call veracity. We need multiple corroborations to get to that point, not taking anything at face value. I trust that the professionals in the system to this point under the Trump administration are qualified to know that they can take the intel value of a foreign country up to a certain level. But there is some truth to say that with that much uranium enrichment that Iran has maintained for many, many years, in the limited degree to which we have access, it's coming through the IAEA. But the Iranians have always shown, they'll show you just as much as they want you to see. They're not going to, like Syria or Libya before them, they're not going to just say, here, you can look at everything. We'll show you everything. Because we don't know necessarily, I think, per se, where everything is. So the intent piece is a slippery slope. It's hard to know when they want to activate that. The irony in this, and this is something for you and I and everybody who watches this and is fascinated by this, does this bombing campaign and this effort now cause Iran to calculate, okay, fine, we were staying fairly neutral, we were not going to show our cards, we'll play along with this diplomacy round with President Trump, and then we're all in now because we know the game that the hand that they just played. Because we just created leverage against Iran. If we obliterated it, and I think we did a grave degree of damage to their program, then they are going to likely in the next few years go to Pakistan, go to North Korea, go to China, go to Russia. They may decide, you know what, making an organic program is not worth it. But who's to say they're not going to go to Pakistan right now, who's got inroads with them in certain ways, and say, I'll just buy one from you. How are we going to stop that? Mm-hmm. And there's a whole new set of considerations now that we have opened up. And that's fine. We have to be prepared for that, and we're going to have to deal with it in a different way now. But I think for now, we've stopped this escalation period, and it's a question of how are we going to now how are the variables now that we're going to have to adjust? Because I don't think Iran is done, especially now that they've seen that we're ready to take actions against them. They're going to look for a different avenue.
Yeah. So Trump gets on social media and says, he's negotiated a ceasefire. There's peace. The war's over. And, that barely got sent out. I mean, he barely had time to hit send. And then the bomb started again. So, and when when reporters asked him about it, he used some pretty hard language. It seemed like he was pretty mad about it at both countries.
Yeah, I think some things happen like this where, let's say, Prime Minister Netanyahu decides it's not yet the time. And I think if he's not careful with President Trump, he will be put in the doghouse, right? President Trump does not have time to ever place necessarily interest in the agenda of Prime Minister Netanyahu above his. I think Israel, in this case with Prime Minister and his government, is testing the extent or the degree. I mean, because they want to finish the job. They really do. And there's a lot of advocates here in the United States that are of that same mindset. Hey, this is the thought process. You got them on the ropes. The way Prime Minister Netanyahu and his Israeli government view Iran is nothing short than Adolf Hitler, because they've threatened their existence. So what they're going to do is they want the kill shot. They want the TKO. They want to take them out. My question is, and this is where we've got to be smart, how do you get to that point? Your next step is to start bombing ports, facilities, critical infrastructure, start reducing their economic capacity, right? And that's going to be an attrition bombing campaign. And so with Israel's 350 warplanes, how are you going to do that? It's like the same problem, Tom, that Ukraine has. Ukraine's appetite to take back their territory at this point is far greater than their ability to deliver combat capability. They've lost their combat capability 2 years ago. They are in a state of denial if they think they're going to return it, but that's really not what they think internally. They think we've got to keep fighting, because if we don't, how are we going to explain to our population that we sacrificed 1.5 million people to this cause that we never truly could realize in the first place? And so I think Israel is going to kind of go back and forth with us here and there, because they got to do what they think is in their best interest. And I think America has very strong and aligned interests with Israel right now, but there is a divergence at a certain point, and the president's not ready or doesn't believe yet. He's not convinced, I think, that regime change is possible through aerial bombing campaigns. Mm-hmm. So we're just going to have to go back to the drawing books and figure this out and figure out what the outcome and objective we all want. And then we're going to have to try some other options, because the aerial bombing is an option to get them to the table, but it's not going to change the equation that we want, which is a whole new government to work with.
Yeah. A lot of this, I don't mind sitting back and watching. And I believe that Israel certainly has a right to defend herself, do whatever she wants to do in annihilating Iran, if that's what it takes. And we could just sit back and say, have at it. But here's the other thing. We've gotten involved now. And with our involvement, first off, in your opinion, Marcell, is it constitutional? And secondly, how can Iran hurt us if we don't have our ships over there? I understand you got the Strait of Hormuz, and there's things that are important to our economy that are over there, probably more important to Europe's economy. But why do we need to be involved, other than the fact that we are an ally of Israel?
Yeah, I mean, there's two parts to your question. The constitutionality, that goes back to the War Powers Act. You know, Congress has deferred all this bombing for many, many years to both Democrats and Republicans. So every time something like this happens, it's almost like performative theater for Congress to come back and say, well, you never asked us. Well, when's the last time? Was it Harry Truman? Did Harry Truman tell you he was going to drop a bomb, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I mean, I will surrender this point, right? I will submit this point. Iran's threat to Israel is greater than it is to the United States. Okay, but it's not in anyone's interest, regionally or to the United States, that Iran has a nuclear weapon, because they're somewhat an unpredictable regime. You don't know how that could be used. We don't know who came into our country. So when you talk about the threat from Iran, well, every time we've had a Democrat administration, the open borders came in, or they gave money to Iran to negotiate. So there's a big difference with the way that each administration has gone and negotiated this with Iran. For President Obama, it was shower them with billions of dollars, and maybe they'll agree to give up their nuclear program, and we'll make nice. And then with Reagan, Bush, and the Republicans with President Trump, it's been, okay, we're going to give you hardcore sanctions, and if you don't listen, it's going to be harder for you, and come to the negotiating table and give it up. I think what generally works more for that part of the world is the latter example with President Trump. It's not what President Obama did. You can argue what President Obama did is he helped them fund their ballistic missile program. He helped them fund their nuclear program. Mm-hmm. So, we seem to be, with each cycle, burying ourselves. There's another thing to note. How many more opportunities do we have to degrade that? Because as with time goes on, Iran does get better air defenses through their cooperation with Russia, which the Biden administration put out there on a platter with the way that they castigated and isolated Vladimir Putin in Russia. Up to that point, Russia was a stakeholder in the global space that could be used to leverage China's influence and hedge against that, but not anymore. So it's kind of like we have driven this axis. We've aligned with Europe, which is weakening. It's weakening because of open borders. It's weakening because of demography. It's weakening because of what do they believe in anymore, right? Their faith system is, and their nuclear family and other factors of their culture just don't work anymore. So we should be aligning ourselves with countries that have vitality, that we do business with. That is going to strengthen us inevitably. So it's going to be interesting to see where we're going to go with Iran in the future, and how much involvement we're going to have.
Looks like Trump has gotten these other NATO countries to up their spending a little bit for NATO. I mean, we were doing all the funding here, and so this is a big deal. They need to put up or shut up.
Yeah, so I think there was a vote recently about there's 27 different NATO countries. And I mean, if you think about what NATO's main driven purpose has been the last several years, it's to buy U.S. arms equipment. and it's to employ this security umbrella. My experience with them is they've supported us on a limited or always with some kind of justification of we can't do this much or this much. So I've not been the biggest fond of the way that they've come to our aid in some of these wars because they've self-limited themselves. But, I mean, his pressure on them, think about where we were in his first term. You know, they were moaning and groaning that they had to get to the treaty amount, which is 2%. And he pressured them. And then the war in Ukraine came, and remember, they were mocking him at the UN and laughing when he was telling them these things in person. And then the war in Ukraine came in 2022, and they're like, oh, my God, Germany, we can't fight Russia. United States, please surge your military capability. And it was all about bleeding our weapon stocks, and we were giving them anything and everything we could find and buying it from other countries, third countries. So they didn't heed us, our warning, because of their arrogance, I say, their stupidity, and they came back to us. And now they realized President was right. And now he's saying go to 5%. And now they're moaning and groaning about that. So they're like such an unwilling participant. They're not a good partner, in my estimate, to pin everything to. We've got to find a broader array of partners. We put so much of our energy, because I get it, culturally more of an identity to Europe. But what about Latin America? What about Africa? These are areas that can boom growth for us in countries that align almost more culturally in some ways with faith. In other ways, we've got to start building a new paradigm if we're going to be a global power in the world. But we're sinking all our energy into Europe. And I think with President Trump, he's turned the corner on that. And we're going to see. But, I mean, it will be good for us business-wise to continue, NATO. I just don't think NATO's ever going to challenge Russia in a meaningful way.
We're talking with Marcell Strbich, retired lieutenant colonel, 20-year Air Force intelligence officer, combat veteran, and a GOP candidate for Ohio's Secretary of State in 2026. The Tom Roten Show is powered by DutchMillerAuto.com. More than 1,000 automobiles that you can choose from. Actually, about 1,200 at last I checked at DutchMillerAuto.com. New and pre-owned, several makes and models for you to choose from. When you pick out the vehicle you want, you'll get the best deal right up front with friends and family pricing for everyone. Shop online at DutchMillerAuto.com. That's DutchMillerAuto.com. Marcell, whether or not Iran ever has nuclear capabilities, they hate America. And we have known for years, well over 10 years. So not just what Biden let in, but back during the Obama years, we learned, and our government knows, that there are terrorist sleeper cells, jihadist cells all over America, probably in Ohio, probably in West Virginia, and we're not doing anything about that right now. I wonder, though, with this escalation, could that be something that triggers those Islamic jihadist cells to activate in some way here on our homeland?
Yeah, I think that our national security services are postured, and to some degree, they're tracking some of that. But it's impossible, considering, as everybody knows, the amount of people that came into this country. So that's always going to be something we have to account for. I mean, the world comes to the United States, some of it legally, the majority in the last few years illegally, and we just have to be on guard. My concern would be this, Tom, that something like that happens, and then either state government or federal government looks to kind of do what they did post 9/11, thrust upon us in the name of more safety, in the name of more security, another version of a Patriot Act, and tightens up digital surveillance and these type of things. I think that would be anti-liberty. I would question the extent or the degree that the Patriot Act truly protected us. I'm sure there are facets of it that did, but then it also brought in civil asset forfeiture. And so while it was originally intended to focus us for protections against overseas, look at how quickly under an administration like the Biden administration, they flipped the script. And those that were saying and doing things that were politically distasteful to the administration or speaking in a certain way, all of a sudden had the weight of an agency looking at their business, had them taking down some, their social media information. And so, that kind of creates a silent terror that sits in the back of people's minds that causes us to question, can I say this? Will I lose my job? So that's the type of thing that worries me. It's not that America can't withstand, attacks. We just had the LA situation and these riots, showcasing the latest flame out of the anti-American movement in this country that is seeking to sow chaos and destabilize the country. But what you have to watch and what we have to watch is who's coming to power and how are they getting their agenda enacted into laws. So we've got to be very careful with the balkanization of America. We've always had to be careful. It's not a problem that we have first-generation Americans from any culture, right? Assimilation is a key factor for our success in many ways. But because our school systems have been, in many ways, shunning the American value system and teaching it from a civic standpoint, we have three different, generations, two generations, if you would, of rejecting the American way of life and system. And so the question becomes, are we balkanized? Are there groups like in Michigan or Minnesota or Ohio that, do not want to be a part of this American system or want to live within it, but want to live separate to the point where they don't want to partake in it and create a different kind of system? I would watch more for that and to try to head that off by engaging with those communities, not shunning them, but going in them. And that's where the Republicans, they're not doing a strong enough of a job. My candidacy for Secretary of State, I bring that unique blend because I served in our military. My parents were deeply American and patriotic, but they came from Europe and from a communistic system. But I wanted to give of myself back because I knew what they struggled with and went through. And it's these type of instances like myself, when you have the opportunity to connect and make those inroads, that's how we grow the Republican tent. And we've got to be open to that too. So we've got to walk a fine line between seeing everybody as a threat and also making people come over to our side.
Yeah, and as I transition this, I'm not suggesting that this man was an Iranian terrorist, but in your own state, Marcell, in the city of Perrysburg, earlier this year, it was found out that a 24-year-old Venezuelan man was arrested for pretending to be a 16-year-old high school student in Ohio. I mean, it's unbelievable that this guy was able to pull this off. So an illegal alien from Venezuela living in Ohio, 24 years old. This is where our system is right now. I mean, somebody in that school system had to know, first off, this guy's not a legal citizen. Secondly, there's no way that he's 16, and yet they enroll him and nobody says anything for like a year. This is ridiculous, and it just shows how lax we are. Not that this guy was a terrorist. I mean, he could have been easily, but how lax we are in allowing these people here. And I appreciate what you're saying, because if you go from that ditch to the other ditch, and now we're just going to surveil every American, and Terry Bradshaw trying to get on a plane in Springfield, Missouri, they had him go through extra security. Terry Bradshaw, an elderly, Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the most famous sports guys in history, and they're patting him down, looking through his luggage. I mean, that's the other extreme of this stupidity.
Yeah, man. In the military, they'd say, if you see something, say something. How many people do you cross every day that kind of think it, but they don't want to say it? We've got to go back to being bold Americans again. I guess for 10 years, we were beat down with this political correctness. I'd say that was from 2000 to 2010. And that was kind of whipped up by President Obama and those folks in the media. Oh, if you're thinking it, you must be a bad person. You must hate somebody. But there was a time that I recall, 90s and 80s, we got along so much better when we pointed things out and said, hey, something isn't right here. And so we have to become bold and boldened again and say these things. And you'd be surprised how many people then come out and be like, you know what? I thought that too. Well, then you need to speak up, right? Because that's how we lose our country too, is we become timid. We become discouraged. We become afraid. So people like myself, I got nothing to fear, man. I've already seen up front and close, what life and death is and what it can be, right? So I don't care, right? I'm out there because at the end of the day, we want to preserve what we love, okay? We want a system that we inherited. We have to uphold it. Those of us who can do something about it, who have a little extra time, resources, go out there and become involved in your community. Say something. That guy got away with that in Perrysburg because people are afraid to say something, right? Yeah. They don't want to lose their jobs and so forth and so on. I get it. I have a little more of a luxury. I got out of the military. I'm not right now in some kind of a multinational corporation, doing my DEI courses. But for others like us, continue to work in ways that you can, push the limit of it. Get yourself in the government, in the civics, in your local side, get in there, because without being in the system, if you shun it, then somebody else is going to design the objectives of the system for us. So we got to get involved. That's why I'm involved in the 2026 Secretary of State race. We know what we got to do to fix the dysfunction. We know what we got to do to make sure only eligible people vote. It's not hard. We're going to execute it here in Ohio. And I'll tell you what, it's going to show in every state from West Virginia down to Florida to Texas is going to see what we're doing in Ohio. And we're going to be the beacon of election integrity here. And we're going to do it when President Trump's in the office.
You mentioned the riots out in L.A. It's what Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass call the mostly peaceful protests, of course. But President Trump sent in the National Guard, sent in other members of the military. Is that the right thing to do, you think?
Of course. And it's not the first time that's happened. What happened in 1992 during the Rodney King riots? And as soon as that occurred, that was the catalyst event to end that. Look, the president has an authority to activate the National Guard. And I know people lost their minds over this, but in the end of the day, that was for a limited basis. It's not like the president is using military force to occupy cities and do what the British did, take over people's homes in the Quartermaster Act of 1775, I believe. So when it comes down to it, we cannot allow disorder, to prevail. There was billions of dollars of damage that was done in L.A. It speaks more to the ineptitude of the governor, the mayor, who has very questionable background and loyalties to this country to allow for that pandemonium. And when it comes to that, there are other countries that are watching the United States reaction. Don't think that China doesn't, CCP, specifically the government there, I want to distinguish, because there's a lot of wonderful Chinese people that are phenomenal in this country that are fighting and left that communist system, that are hardworking Americans and want America to fight back against the CCP. But what I'm saying, the CCP, they'll work with a third-party group to activate that. In fact, that's something we should be more aggressive on. Follow the money. Are they using some of these cut-out third-party groups? If they are, we need to be stronger on this issue. If we need to prohibit these groups in the way that they organize, or we need to bring them under tighter, stricter control, oversight, we need to do that, because my concern is that foreign agents are using these groups to foment unrest in our country, and it's costing us as taxpayers a lot of money.
Yeah,
in lives.
Without a doubt. And look, when there are seriously realistically peaceful protests, marches, whatever, I'm fine with that, even with people I disagree with, and I know you are too. Yes. But are you a little surprised that there were so many of the No Kings protests or events in Ohio? Not just Columbus, but other cities as well. And then, of course, as per usual, in June, you have a number of the LGBTQ pride events and so forth going on, even in smaller towns in Ohio. I don't know. It just seems to me, again, people have the right to protest, but it seems to me it's a little bit odd for that to happen in a place like Ohio. What do you think?
Well, Ohio is a large state, Tom. We have different population groups. I look at this a little differently maybe than you are. My perspective's a little different, right? We came off of a major election. It was a popular vote win for President Donald Trump. Those people who will never reconcile with him, no matter what his policy is, no matter what he does, no matter how successful this country is or who is successful, they're not swale, many of them, toward him, right? So they've made their point and their determination. You can look at it a little bit differently. They're gathering because they're demoralized and they don't have a real leader like President Trump. Love him or hate him, he is a leader. He takes a decision, he puts it on his shoulder, and he moves forward. And that is what we in the tradition of American leaders and people want. We want somebody to own a decision. When it comes to these folks in the other side, in this case they're supporting in the Democrat side, they're trying to find themselves. They're going from one inflamed passion to another. If they're not holding a Ukraine flag up one week, they're holding a Palestine flag up. If they're not holding that flag up, they're holding an Iran flag up. If that's not the flag, they're holding an LGBTQ flag. There's something they're seeking that they don't have. It's something that's internal. And so in addressing that and dealing with that, you have to kind of have some degree of empathy and expectation that you're not going to fix that overnight. You're not going to placate or satisfy them. So let them express themselves up to a point, okay? And then if it gets in any way destructive, then you have to come down on that because we can't accept that kind of a chaos or behavior within the system. So, the No Kings protest, it's always billionaires. You notice the billionaires are always funding this. So there's always a privileged, aristocratic person, who's trying to make a political point, and in a way he's using discontent, justified or unjustified, to whip people up. And that's no different than it's always been in this country and how it's always going to be. It's not really a movement funded by the people. It's a movement funded by those who want to create that level of friction so that they can return back to power on the basis of whipping people back up into a fervor.
Marcell, lastly, tell us about your campaign, how it's going, and where folks can learn more about your run as a Republican for Secretary of State in Ohio's 2026 Republican primary.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for that. Folks can go to my campaign website, Strbich, S-T-R-B like boy, I-C-H, 4FOR, Ohio.com. It's going very well. I filed about 8-9 weeks ago as a political outsider, taking on what were effectively all term limited elected officials who've been in the system politically and are swapping seats out once again, not placing anything on the table to offer people in terms of election fixes and reforms, literally trying to stay viable politically, to stay in the system. What I'm doing is coming at it differently. I've worked this issue of election reform all the way for the last 2 years. I put together 3 different bills to close loopholes for non-citizen registration voting, a much more secure system of hand-markable paper ballots only so that we don't even need to use electronic software to cast a ballot. I think that's a waste of money. I think it's nothing but a security vulnerability and threat that we've continued. And I've tried to close loopholes when it comes to mail-in ballots. I think only valid excuses should be used in that instance. And finally, I'm working like President Trump to get to a same-day, in-person, election day vote. Okay, it's doable. We have 30 days. That's not acceptable with no excuse absentee voting. So my platform and agenda is exactly where primary voters want, and I have both the credentials and say it to do it because I've been working on that for 2 years as a volunteer dad, constituent activist who came out of the military and is applying my knowledge and skills from that area into this to make this change, because that's ultimately what I think is going to hold this country together, is free, fair, and honest elections. If we don't have that, it doesn't matter what issue you have. You're for gun rights, you're for pro-life, all that can be taken away from you with a dishonest system. And I think it's gotten to be too loose, and I can carry it and bring it back with the right governor, with the right president. And so I'm the candidate, and I've raised over 6-digit figures. I blew out our initial figures. I'm closing in. I'm just 10,000 shy of my stretch goal. If you can help me get there, I can set the pace for every single candidate that's grassroots coming out and is looking to make this change. And it will affect this country for many, many years. When one state as significant as Ohio does this, we have our chance now with President Trump. It's not enough to have voted him in. We've got to actually elect people who want to do the job and don't want to build a political career. That's me. I can accomplish that with your help. You can make a big difference, whether you're in West Virginia or you're anywhere in Ohio. In this country, you need to start electing secretaries of state. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to actualize President Trump's agenda.
All right, 20-year military veteran and Republican candidate for Ohio Secretary of State, Marcell Strbich. Great talking to you again, sir. Appreciate your perspective on all these issues. Thank you for coming on.
Always great to be with you. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody.
All right, the Tom Roten Show is sponsored in part by New Hope Christian School in South Charleston, West Virginia, offering smaller class sizes, allowing more one-to-one education and mentoring. And New Hope Christian School uses a variety of educational materials from various curriculum developers, excellent curriculum, and a biblical worldview. If that's important to you, you ought to check them out. Their website is nhcswv.org. They're now enrolling for the 2025-26 school year beginning this fall, and they participate with the Hope Scholarship in West Virginia. So check them out. New Hope Christian School in South Charleston, West Virginia. The website again, NHCSWV, stands for New Hope Christian School, West Virginia, nhcswv.org. And want to hear from you, Roten Army, about the Israel-Iran conflict, the U.S. involvement in that. The latest is Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, says that the U.S. strikes on Iran were, quote, historically successful, after the Ayatollah downplayed the impact of those strikes. What do you think? I guess time will tell, right? But send me an email with your thoughts, tomrotenshow@outlook.com, tomrotenshow@outlook.com. Folks, be sure to thank all the businesses who support this program, and I would appreciate you sharing the program as well. tomrotenshow.com is where you can find all the episodes. Also, I share every episode on my social media pages. Follow me there, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. That's going to do it for today. A Thursday, June 26th, 2025. And I thank you, Roten Army, for listening to The Tom Roten Show.